I have a whole yard of barefoot horses, and it is a massive commitment, and you have to be mindful that sometimes you're going to have to support them. And, you break a sweat when you put 4 hoof boots on an Irish draft.
What are the things that you see that people struggle with early on? And what would your advice be for people so that they don't just give up and go back to shoes, for example? This podcast is brought to you by White Griffin and Equifeast. Hi, Miri.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, I'm alright. This feels sort of novel in some ways. We've had such technical difficulties. I can't even begin to tell you. My internet
the universe.
It
really feels like the universe doesn't want this podcast to exist, because I can't tell you how many problems we've had.
Literally so many problems. We had to move guests. I've actually had complete internet wipeout situations where we went on to record and it just stopped working at that exact moment. Anyway, we move on. We live to fight another day, as they say. How have you been?
Indeed.
How's your week been?
Week's been really good. We've had a really good time lately. Harley's on really good form, as am I, to be fair. We went cross-country schooling.
Lovely.
Which was the second time we've ever done it on grass. And it was amazing. It was so fun. We had a really lovely instructor. We ended up jumping, we did half a coffin. So we didn't jump. If you don't know what a coffin is, it's a jump, then a ditch, then another jump. So you jump in, over the ditch, and then out. We didn't jump in because I had never even done a ditch on him before. So we did the little ditch, and then we jumped over the ditch and out of over the coffin. We did a sunken road, which is when you jump down, down a step almost, and then across, and then sort of up another one. And we did logs and rails, and I just felt really good, and he felt really good. He seemed to really enjoy himself. It was very fun.
Oh, that's so nice. And you went to a show?
We went to a show yesterday. We went to dressage at Farrier, and I did an intro and a prelim, which I haven't done in a really long time. And my only goal in the prelim was, can I get the canter in the right place, and can I keep the canter in the 20x40? And he smashed it. He literally was amazing. We were in the big outdoor, which at Farrier is quite imposing. It's got a big judge's tower. It's got all the boards. It's got banners and stuff. And he didn't spook at anything. He coped so well in all the... We had to warm up in an arena, which was also being used by these tiny little jumping ponies who were very quick. And he coped so well. I was very, very proud of him. The judge was a bit harsh, but the judge was harsh with everyone. And because I'd set my own goals that were not defined by somebody else, I had a great time.
Do you remember when we had that conversation in the
Yes,
competition
I do.
episode? And I was like, you can't really control what someone else thinks of it, because they might just not like him. So that's really interesting and well done. And I do really think that you and Harley are testament to, if you go gently, if you think about what you're doing, and if you listen to your horse, you can have a happy, competitive animal. And I do think that is a really important thing to notice, because sometimes it can feel really impossible to do this job with horses. I know I felt it before. I'm like, can I ethically, with their welfare at the top of the list, with them in mind, can we still do fun things and compete and have a nice time? And I think that you are such a shining, really great star thing. I don't know, there's a word for that. That I'm a bit tired. It's quite late in the day today on a Monday. That, you are a real, ambassador for that.
Aww, that's very kind. Thank you.
Well, yeah, but I think it's really true. And it's true because of the success that you're having. You don't need me to tell you that. You're having a nice time with a young horse as an amateur rider. That is no mean feat, Rhi.
Yeah. No, that's very kind. And I find myself these days, not in a judgmental way, but I do, I think because I'm so aware of, is Harley having a nice time? And I'm not saying, I don't think he has a nice time 100% of every second of every day that he exists, but I think he has a nice time 99% of the time. And I did go to the show, and I was sort of looking around, and there was a horse, for example, in a box, and it just was kicking out the lorry, properly going for it. And obviously they were sort of kind of, I think, just ignoring them, because obviously they didn't know what to do with this horse. But he was so uncomfortable and so unhappy in there. And there was a few other things I saw that I was just oh, it's just a bit different, isn't it? But
Yeah, and we see a lot of that. Like I was talking about on the last podcast about that awful stuff that I saw on Facebook, that post that I commented on and got a load of hate for. There have been a number of posts that I've seen since, and I'm, you and I spend all of our time trying to make sure that our horses have the number one best time they possibly can within the circumstances we put them in. And then there are people that seem to do the most reckless, dangerous, horrible things. And I don't know, maybe they do have bad experiences. Maybe they do have their, best horses get injured. I don't know. Maybe that does happen. But it does seem to be a bit that the more you care, the harder you get it. I've thought of that before. Like, the more you care about your horses, the more of a hard time you have.
I think maybe it's the way people view it as well. So, like, they don't attribute their behaviour to the outcome if they do have a bad outcome. But speaking of that, I had my second session with the mindset coach I've been working with, Nikki Penny, who, I should say, it's a sponsored arrangement, so she's sponsoring my sessions essentially, and I'm then talking about them. But I have to say, they have been pretty transformative. I am quite cynical when it comes to not all therapy, but certain types of therapy, and I'm not very trusting of people, as one of the things we've dug into on these sessions. But we had a really interesting conversation where we were meant to start the conversation talking about some of the fears I have around jumping heights and cantering out in open spaces. And we actually, as we got talking, and bear in mind I've not really given her any background on me or whatever, and she hasn't really looked into me because she wanted to sort of, get me as I am. We actually ended up talking about Woody, and she was like, I really don't feel that you have dealt with the trauma of losing your first horse. And I think without realising it, a lot of the decisions that you're making and the pressure you put on yourself is because you're convinced that it's going to happen again. And so you put all this pressure on yourself to go out and do stuff because you're convinced that you're not going to have very long with him being sound. And I was using that language, and I am convinced. I mean, actually, we've had a conversation now, so I'm less convinced. But I was absolutely of the mindset that, like, it's only so long before something goes wrong, because that's just how it is. And it was very interesting. We did a whole sort of piece of work, which I don't know the name of, but it's where you get into an emotion and you try and figure out what it would say to you, and you give it a colour and a shape, and you try and disconnect the emotion from the sensation in your body. And it was very, very interesting and visceral and quite sort of not traumatic, but she was basically right. I think I wouldn't have had the response I had on that session had I dealt with the grief. And when we talked about it, I was like, well, I'm really surprised that you think I haven't dealt with it, because I did a lot of crying and I was very sad and I did these things and da-da-da. And she was like, do you realise you've just rattled off like a checklist for grief? She was like, you don't get to complete grief. That's not how it works, even for perfectionists. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and that is so powerful to acknowledge those things, like to re-go through that. And I think it is interesting because I've had lots of bad experiences with horses, and there will be a certain amount of sort of blame that we put on ourselves, right? And I think that's a big part of it. But it is our responsibility, of course, to be our horses' guardians. I think you were set up for failure with Woody. That was unfortunately why he came to you, so that you could be the person that allowed him the life that he had, however long that was going to be. But it is that sort of that like shifting of perspective of like that isn't how it happens. It's not the pattern that has to be followed, because that was him and Harley is Harley and you are you now. It's like that, what people talk about when they say that even if you have a sibling, you don't get the same parents. Because like my brother and I, we had different parents. My parents were a different life. My brother and I are 4.5 years apart, so that's 4.5 years of change. I know how much I've changed in 4.5 years. You know how much you have changed from who you were as a horse person with Woody to who you are with a horse person as Harley. Look at us. You're even in a position where you have started a podcast with a friend that is probably like having these conversations that maybe spark a lot of uncomfortable thoughts in your mind about how you're doing things with Harley, about
100%.
Like our topic of conversation today about shoes, for example, barefoot horses and shoes. It's you are a different person. So when you get those recurrent, oh my God, it could happen. Yeah, it could. It could, of course. But it might not. And you are going to do everything you possibly can in your power to not let it happen. And that is the key.
And she said one thing, and it might just help you if you also struggle with the grip of this worry. She said, the question I have to keep asking myself is Harley okay in this moment? And if the answer is yes, that is all that you can do, because you have to live in the present. So yeah, what about you? How's your week?
Well, I had an interesting one. Blondie got bitten. No, she didn't get bitten. She got kicked.
Yes,
but it looks like a bite.
In the school. Oh yes, talk about this.
So it was really horrible, actually, and so we were working with one of the young horses, and I was working with Blondie, and she'd done some really nice balancing on the balance pads, and then she had just taken herself away, and she does that. She comes to and from the work we do, and I'm very open with that. And there'll be certain horses that I would be more cautious of her doing that around, but she's generally very good. She just goes to the hedge, comes back to me. This time she went to the hedge, and on her way back to me, she went relatively nearby to the other horse that was in the arena, and without any warning or any prior uncertainty from them, they double-barreled her, and they kicked her in the neck. And she seemed fine. She was okay. She didn't seem very bothered.
How did she respond? Was she quite taken aback?
She just sort of, she was really shocked. And I think it's because she is a very, very trusting horse. She is naturally a real horse's horse. She would never be the one to put her ears back at another one, or you could bump into her. She's so very
funny, her difference.
Right? Whereas a human being, bumping into her, she'd kick you clean out of her stable. The horse, different. And it was I felt really sad for her, because it was one of those moments when a child would go up to another child or to a person and be like, hi, can we be friends? And that other person was not kind in that moment. She looked really dismayed that this had happened. And she was left with a dent in the muscle in her neck.
Oh, God.
And I really, really panicked, because I thought, that looks really bad. That could be really, really serious. And I felt very, very responsible, because I had trusted in her, and then she had got hurt. Now, obviously, horses are horses, but she kind of was in an impossible situation in that moment. And I just felt very guilty. And thankfully my vet was here that day, and we looked at her through Zora's stable, because she really, really doesn't like the vet. So we did protected contact. So he looked at me interacting with her, but even just him being there and watching her, she's very different. But he said she had good mobility in both directions in the neck, and I was able to touch it relatively soon after, despite it looking really bad. But yeah, I just think it's a reminder that, even someone who, I guess because she's my own, I may be different. I wouldn't do that with a client's horse, I don't think. And it's sort of a reminder that I need to be not too sort of free range with her in that moment. But I don't really know if there's a lesson to be learnt in certain way, in a bigger perspective. But it was really traumatic and really stressful, and I felt pretty wiped out afterwards, and really concerned for her. But other than that, I haven't really had a huge amount going on. I'm filming lots of new stuff for my online training platform, which is really exciting and kind of exhausting. But in general, I have, not a huge amount to report. I've got some exciting things going on behind the scenes that I sadly can't share about at the moment, but no doubt soon I will hopefully be able to. Rhi is smiling at me because she knows everything.
I don't know what to say because I'm not allowed to say anything.
But stuff is happening for us at home, but for me, but it's nothing I can say at this moment, so just watch this space, guys. But no, just generally feeling good. I suppose I could comment on my mental health, which has been remarkably better. I went on holiday and actually didn't feel 100% when I was on holiday. My parents eat dinner really late, and I kind of get into this sort of mindset of I don't know if you do this, but I tell myself, oh well, if I eat dinner late, I'm not going to feel good.
My partner doesn't like to eat dinner late because he's like, I won't be able to sleep properly because I'll feel too full. And so yeah, I do get this.
Yeah, and I really lean into it. And I'm like,
what does that mean?
I mean, I really allow myself to tell myself those things all the time.
Okay.
And actually, the reality of it is I ate dinner with my mum late on holiday every day. They wouldn't eat till 8 o'clock. I'm not talking late, but
That's quite late.
I would normally, and I'd normally try and eat at 7, probably, 6:30, 7 o'clock. I really like eating really early, but anyway. And it's like I kind of get in this mindset of, like you were saying, like you kind of just you almost plan ahead of having a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, being present is just such an enormously powerful thing. Like, my ability to plan all of the disastrous things that could happen in the future is so impressive. I could write, if that was a job, I'd be really good at it. But then also living in those past things that used to happen or that we used to do or that have happened. There have been times when I've eaten dinner late and I found it really hard to digest the food, and then I've had some intrusive thoughts, and then I've had a panic attack because of it, and then I end up being sick all night because the cycle has just driven me to that. So it's not totally unfounded. It is possible for these things to happen and for my body to be able to do it. But it's kind of this like mindset shift of, is that happening right now? Exactly like you said. No. Yeah. And the sense, I'm getting really good, and I'm so proud of myself for this, because an emotion only lasts 90 seconds. And I'm getting really good at this weird feeling occurs in my body, and I just go, okay, hello, how can I help? I think this is a past part of me just showing up to protect me from the thing that I'm doing, the hard thing, or the possible hard thing, or whatever it might be. I don't really need to lean into this right now because I am actually safe. And then by the time I've said those things to myself, it's just gone.
Do you know what? I did that for the first time the other day, and it was actually quite remarkable. It was the morning of cross country, and I was feeling a little bit nervous because I haven't been in a long time, and I was going to have to warm up on my own, which is a big thing, and I was just feeling butterflies. And I was eating my breakfast, and I was scrolling on one of my channels, and I came across this quite horrible comment about my riding. It was quite personal, and it was just not very nice. And it just comments like that, sometimes they sort of catch me by surprise, less so, but occasionally they catch me by surprise, and it just added to the feeling I had, which was already a lot of anxiety and whatever. And my immediate sort of gut was to get up and start planning to leave the house and like be really busy. And I remembered what I'd said with my conversations with Nikki, the coach, and I was like, no, I'm going to sit back down. So I made myself sit back down on the sofa, and I just had a conversation with myself about what was I feeling, and does it really mean that, and what are the other things that could be true, and and it took me like 3 or 4 minutes. I had to just really take a moment, but it was remarkable how I felt afterwards, because sometimes comments like that stay with me for days, like particularly bad ones. But this one, like I couldn't even tell you what it said. I literally can't remember.
Amazing.
Because I felt it in that moment. It was wild. Yeah.
Well done. I mean, it takes a lot of work. It's a life's journey, I think, a lot of it, and not being affected by other people, and staying present in the moment, and not comparing yourself, or all of those hard things that we have to do. We have very exciting guests with us today.
I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm not ill, which is really nice, because I was so unwell for the last interview.
So we have got Tom Broadbridge, who is a farrier, and Lily Wilson, who you'll know from season 1. Was she season 1 or 2? Can't remember.
I thought she was season 2, but...
Yeah, I think maybe you're right, season 2. The holistic vet. But there's something slightly different about Tom. He is a barefoot specialist farrier. And we thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation with Lily, who is a really pro-barefoot, pro-horse health vet, and very open to all the different kind of ways in which you can help horses. And then Tom, who I have had some communications with for other reasons, because he's inventing some very cool hoof boots that he wants me to trial, which is really exciting, because I have got lots of barefoot horses. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting conversation, and one that is very pertinent, because barefoot can get a bit of flack, I suppose, but then also barefoot can be a hugely transformative thing in my book. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I think also it often is quite one way or the other, and I think what's nice about this conversation is you've got Miri, who's got all of her horses barefoot, me, who currently has my horse shod, Lily, who is actually pro barefoot but quite balanced if she thinks a horse particularly needs shoes, and then Tom, who I presume trained originally as a farrier and then went barefoot. So practicing. Quite balanced, I think. It's not like these people have always only ever been barefoot, which I think is really important, because there are going to be plenty of people listening to this who have their horses shod or, you know, are not even thinking about going barefoot. And I do think it's important to be able to have a balanced conversation without it being so
purist.
One way or the other. Yeah, purist, that's a good word.
Yeah, because I do think that the barefoot community can get kind of a bit of a bad name because people are like, well, what on earth do you mean you've got shoes on your horse?
Yeah.
You know, and we really hope that this conversation is balanced and is communicative in the right ways. And I think, let's get Lily and Tom on and let's get started because I'm interested in how this is all going to play out.
Me too. And I consider myself barefoot curious, so I think that's my position for the conversation.
I love that. I think that might be a weird corner of the internet that you probably don't want to Google.
No. Oh. Oh no. Oh gosh. Okay,
I'm winding you up. I know what you meant, and everyone here will know what you meant, other than maybe a strange man that likes feet.
This is a great moment to thank the season sponsor of the podcast, White Griffin. And as is becoming tradition with this season, every week we are giving you a new area of sustainability to discuss and think about and perhaps add to your horsey life. And so today we're going to be talking about proper waste management on yards and what happens when we're doing it the right way. So, Miri, what do you think of when you think about proper waste management in the context of sustainability?
So, for example, something like recycling is something that I have implemented on my yard. I have this big recycling bin and we're really mindful that we are recycling appropriately. We follow the guidelines that recycling company give us and we make sure that we, do the best we possibly can when it comes to the waste, because there is quite a lot of plastic that is involved in horses. And even if you are doing the best you can and using as little as you can, there is a certain amount of waste that does come with that, with bedding, for example. So yeah, recycling is definitely something. What about you? I feel like you might talk about cost per wear or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, you're so right. Buy once, buy well is a big thing of mine. So obviously we can't always be in charge of the materials and whether or not they are recyclable or sustainable, especially when we're buying something that we need to protect our horses in some way. A lot of people don't want to compromise on that, which I totally understand. But if you have the funds to buy something that's a little more premium, that's going to last you a bit longer, so what type of rugs are you buying? What kind of Equitex is a great example that Miri and I both use. Are you buying coats, for example, that are going to last you more than just one season? Trying not to buy into fashion trends as much, although of course everyone deserves a treat, but that's something to be aware of. And actually I think in this particular day and age, buying stuff secondhand is so much easier. There's a great Equitex pre-loved Facebook group. There's Vinted. There's Equipped, which is a secondhand horsey marketplace. There's so many. I mean, I bought my Pico jacket off eBay. You can buy deals everywhere these days. And so I think that's a great way as well of making sure that it feels cyclical.
Absolutely. And buying things secondhand, I think, is a huge thing in the equestrian space. Sometimes somebody will purchase a rug and it's not quite the right fit for their horse. They'll maybe have used it for a few weeks, but it's not totally perfect and they need it to be perfect because it might have not sat right on that horse's shape, but it might be just the right thing for you. So looking in the secondhand market for things, I think, is a huge thing because we can really be much more sustainable like that without having things so kind of readily available. You know that you're going to need a new fly rug, for example. You start looking in January for your new fly rug, you might be able to find one secondhand rather than having to buy something brand new. And I also think that the way that we look after things is very important. Washing and repairing your rugs on a regular basis is a really good way of actually not letting them become damaged, essentially. Fly rugs are a prime example of this. The dirtier a fly rug gets, the less sort of stretch that the material will have and the more likely they are to rip. So keeping things cleaner, making sure you're having your turnout rugs reproofed when you need them is a really good way of keeping things using them until they really die, rather than replacing them all the time because they're just a bit not waterproof or they're not a bit not quite perfect. Replacing buckles, straps, having them patched up. I've got rugs that I've had since I was 16 years old. Seriously, they are some of the best rugs that I've got, and I think because I've looked after them, it's meant that they've really lasted. And I think we can be not fast fashion about it. You know, we can really be more conscious of the kind of the waste, and asking on your yard, using, you know, buying from other people on the yard. Oh, you're not using X. I was about to buy that myself. Can I buy that lunge line off you that's been sat there gathering dust that you don't use anymore because your horse is retired? Giving somebody a tenner for something, it might seem nominal, but it means that you're breaking that constant purchasing cycle.
Yeah. Well, as you continually tease me about, my tweed jacket, which I wore on the weekend, I've had since I was about 15. It's very hairy and it does the job.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a good piece of kit.
There's one last thing that I wanted to mention, and it is also about sort of natural fibres of things. So like, for example, sponges in our tack room. I now buy coconut fibre sponges for the tack room, and they're really good. I do buy them from a large retailer, which isn't the most sustainable thing to do, but actually by not purchasing plastic, I do feel like we're putting less plastic into the water systems, and we're being that little bit more conscious of where things are coming from.
Yeah, I love it. So if we've sparked your interest with this conversation, you can learn more about the work that White Griffin do, or more specifically, Equestrians for Nature, which are their resources for this area. It's all in the show notes, and we'll get back to the podcast.
We have finally made it to the podcast, guys. Tom and Lily, thank you so much for joining us. Tom has literally moved heaven and earth to be here, literally because of the internet situation, but we are so grateful of your time, guys. So yeah, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Great to be here. Brilliant. Good to be here.
And welcome back, Lily. You've been here before.
So the show.
Yeah,
friend of the podcast. Sorry, go on.
There you go. We wanted to have this conversation because I am a very barefoot enthusiastic person. I had a horse when I was quite young who had severe side bone, and she was deemed unrideable, and I met a podiatrist on a first aid course, weirdly, and she was like, have you ever considered having her shoes taken off? She'd worn bar shoes for an extended period of time, no doubt were part of the side bony issue, and ever since I've had a real sort of eye-opening of this side of the world. And I think it's important to have these conversations because not everybody knows that there are other options, or if you have horses that are given these end of road circumstances because the person who is maybe guiding you doesn't know that there are other options. And I think we wanted to have this conversation so that we could all talk about, well, that there are things that you can do. I bear in mind that horse now still is in the field. She went back to jumping 140s. She was amazing. Wow. People used to look at me and be like, I had this pair of really clunky Cavallo boots, and I used to like take her to the 2-star at Kiso and walk across their awful car park, which was definitely not very barefoot friendly. It was like big, uneven, stony rubbish on top of hardcore. It was really bad. And she was potentially still, you know, her feet weren't totally healed at that point. And I'd get to the trot up for the 2-star, and I'd take her boots off and put them on the side of the wall, and everybody would look at me like I was completely mad. And then they'd watch her jump and they'd be like, oh, okay, maybe. And like a couple of people, like friends of friends, like proper show jumpers, were like, so she doesn't wear any shoes? And it is that like classic thing, right? Like horses can't be sport horses without shoes on, right? That's quite a common, everybody's nodding at me.
Absolutely.
For my part, I'm your barefoot curious person. So I have a 7-year-old Irish Draft who I've had since he was 5, and he wears shoes. But I'm trying to get to a place emotionally and in general where I want to take his shoes off, probably this autumn. I had one horse before him who I had put to sleep when he was 10. He had some really awful issues in his feet and a really horrendous injury through the side bone and the pedal bone, and we weren't able to rehab from it despite some extensive efforts. And so since then I've been very aware of feet and hoof structures and the barefoot side of things. So I'm sort of I wouldn't say I'm a skeptic, because I believe in the work of it, but I'm also someone who's like, but shoes are safe and shoes are what I know. And so I think we'll offer something quite balanced. But I'd love for you to introduce yourself. So Tom, why don't you tell us a bit about you, and then Lily, we'll go to you for friends who didn't hear season 2.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So my name's Tom Broadbridge. I'm a farrier. So I qualified in 2003, and I think my biggest interest. So I love horses. I'm a complete horse geek. I don't know whether that's a rare thing for some farriers these days or not. Some people that I know kind of that they don't sort of necessarily seem too bothered, but I want to know how they work. I
Spill
want to
the
know who
tea.
they are. Say again.
I said spill the tea, Tom.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just get it out. I mean, I think okay. So what I'm saying is, some farriers are farriers as a career. They're just farriers as a job, and that's the career they've learned, and that's fair enough. And I think there are always people like that within jobs. But for me, I want to know how they work. I want to know who they are as individuals, the horses I'm talking about, and the people to a point. Um, and so I was interested in remedial farriery. So I specialised in lame horses, and I got to the point where I ran out of remedial ideas, along with the vets that I worked with, and found out about barefoot. So that's kind of where I transitioned. So yeah, it's a brief history, very brief history, but um, I'm really happy where I am because I kind of I balance between the two things. I think sound horses are what we're is the gold standard, isn't it? So it doesn't really matter what we do with their feet. It can be shod or unshod, from my point of view, so long as it's working.
And you have developed a product of your own, right, to help some horses.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of doing that. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are certain issues um, with what we already have. So barefoot boots are good if when they work, but I think they could be better, and I think that shoes could be better too. So whatever there's people on the planet who are looking for the next thing, we can help more horses.
Exciting.
Yeah,
And Lily,
absolutely.
why don't you tell us a bit about you? This is going to be such a good conversation. I can feel it.
Yeah, I'm Lily, and I qualified as a vet in 2016. And then I spent the first 7 or 8 years being in mixed general practice, and then I switched over a bit into small animal emergency practice, partly just for some practical reasons, and also because I've got a really strong interest in pain physiology as well. So that allowed me to um, kind of get some more education in that area, which is not so widely available in the equestrian realm. It's becoming a bit more so, luckily, now. Um, but what I got a bit disillusioned with in general practice was that I felt like I was a firefighter, putting out fires all the time, but not really getting to the really deep rooted causes of problems. And I really didn't like feeling like I didn't have time for the clients who really wanted to delve more deeply into the reason why something had gone wrong with their horse. Um, and, because I had such a massively full diary of patients to get to. So now I'm an independent vet now, and I run a rehab track. I have a track system, and I take in horses for boarding for rehab, and a lot of those need foot rehab, even though um, sometimes that's not the primary focus when people contact me. A lot of the time, it turns out they do. So I've got very interested in feet, and I've also done some training in America called postural rehabilitation, and that is looking at um, it's looking at general kind of health and well-being, but also the reason why horses might become injured or might not recover very well if they do get either an injury as an event or wear and tear kinds of injuries. And I won't go into a huge amount of detail just in the introduction, but as a very brief thing in a nutshell, often if a horse is either getting a wear and tear injury or they're not recovering from a single event injury, their posture and their way of moving is probably straining and overloading certain structures. And that has a lot to do with the shape and alignment of their feet, and also their teeth, and kind of their general body alignment, which all have an interplay together. So the feet are instrumental, and if you don't really address that, even if you were to address everything else, there's often a bit of a sticking point, or the feet can be the primary problem as well.
Yeah, they're sort of being held in that place, right? The body can't sort of move through the healing cycle, I
That's
guess.
right.
So I have a question. I know I spoke a little bit about my own horse that competed to a very good level barefoot, and I know that one of Rhi's kind of concerns, I suppose, and one of the things that I wanted to kind of get out the gate was, do you guys feel that it is possible to have horses competing at a very good level with barefoot feet, and why would that be of benefit? Like, why would we make that change from them if they're a happy shod horse as such? You know, potentially if you really went in depth and looked at the feet, you'd probably notice there was a certain amount of degrading structures potentially. But if they're doing okay with the shoes on, would there be benefits, and would it be possible for them to be good level competition horses, do you guys feel?
I was thinking about your question, and I often try and look at things from a wide angle. So not just answering the question that you're asking. I will get to it. But my question would be, with whatever it is that you want to do with your horse, if you can't do that sufficiently barefoot, would you really want to do it with your horse? And that's a really controversial question. But what I mean by that is, people talk to me about, could my horse jump on any ground without shoes? Because I always use studs. I always use studs when I'm jumping.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, we use studs because the terrain is so soft that you can't land when you're jumping, or you can't take off and then turn without the horse falling over, which is fine. Anything that I say, there's no judgment. It's mainly just my thoughts. So if you're willing to put that kind of strain through the tendons and through the soft tissues by using those studs to be able to do that turn, or be able to compete on that surface, is that really what we want? If it is, then shoes are definitely the answer, because you won't be able to do that barefoot. However, if you think about the shape of the frog is like a tractor tread, isn't it? And horses actually are really, really stable on many different terrains barefoot. And so anything that you should be doing with your horse, yes, you definitely can compete barefoot. And the reason why you may say, well, my horse is perfectly happy shod, there are lots of signs that are happening with that horse in the shod foot that the horse isn't happy. It's just very genuine, and it's doing what you want it to do until it eventually breaks down. And then Lily take over at that point. What do you think, Lily?
Yeah, I love that angle of looking at it. That's brilliant. And I think another really important question to ask is, what is normal? Because we actually usually think that something's normal when it's just common. It's common to see,
What
but
a sentence.
it maybe shouldn't be
Love
considered
it.
normal. So, like old dressage horses get proximal suspensory desmitis. Well, why should they? That's a problem that we should be looking deeper at the root causes, and not only dressage horses do. But so I love that angle of looking at it, because if we're actually pursuing what is not just effective but also ethical, then those are the sorts of questions that we need to ask. And in terms of whether a horse can manage barefoot, say a horse is currently shod, or maybe they are at a lower athletic level and you would like them to move up, then a solution may be shoes, because you might gain better stability, or add some structure. You might improve comfort. But to me, so in terms of, this happens in all parts of the body, but is especially relevant when it comes to their feet. There's this interplay between comfort, structure, and function. And I think some horses just do really well barefoot. They've got really good function, they've got really good structure, and so they remain comfortable. Some horses do really well shod because the problems with a rigid structure attached to their foot don't really arise, because they've kind of got this basis of structure and function that the shoe doesn't interfere with. And then you have some in between where they might actually find it a bit difficult to be barefoot on certain surfaces, or being asked to do certain athletic requirements. And then also the same in shoes. So you might have a problem where the back of the foot collapses a bit when they're in rigid shoes, but you could also have that barefoot. So it's a very individual horse. There isn't a blanket statement, I think, other than I think we should look at what's both ethical and effective.
I can't believe I've never thought about this angle before, because we think about this, even at the higher levels, people go, oh, he's not going to make an eventer because he's not brave enough cross country. He's not going to be a dressage horse because he's not got the movement. But no, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, actually, he's not going to go to 2-star because I can't do that barefoot with him, or whatever it is. It's really interesting to bring that lens in when you're thinking about what is this horse capable of at their most natural quote unquote level. I love that. That's actually made me feel a lot better, because on the sliding on grass was one thing that I did think about. Even though I've only been cross country a handful of times with Harley, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? But the reality is, to your point, actually I'd never put my horse in a situation where they're going to slide around on wet ground. I just wouldn't go. So it's not really an issue. What I am interested in is, let's say I go barefoot, and I think a lot of people give up early because they start getting chips in the hoof, or their horse is quite footy and they're not seeming to settle, or something. So what are the things, maybe this is a good Tom question, what are the things that you see that people struggle with early on, and what would your advice be for people so that they don't just give up and go back to shoes, for example, if they don't want to?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think my biggest, the one take home that I would say, as far as barefoot is concerned, is communication. If whoever it is you're working with, I have no specific alliance to, it doesn't matter whether they're a barefoot trimming farrier, whether they're a barefoot trimming vet, podiatrist, barefoot trimmer, or you're trimming yourself. It doesn't matter to me. So long as someone's doing it right, then that's absolutely fine, okay? But one of the reasons why people give up so easily or so quickly, not so easily, is a lack of communication between them and their equine professionals. And I think if you've got a really good team, which is difficult to get, it's not easy to have vets on board necessarily for barefoot, or your farrier on board for barefoot, for example. But one of the things I've noticed about the relationship between a farrier and a client is the farrier is in charge of the feet. They get booked every 6 to 8 weeks or whatever it is. And the farrier comes in, and if something goes wrong, the farrier is back. If the service is good quality, then they will be back and they will sort it. So as an owner, you're safe in the knowledge that you don't have to deal with feet. That's to do with the farrier. They deal with that. And I think when you go barefoot, there's a slight change, and there's a lot of information on the internet, some of which is true and some of which isn't. And somehow people can become quite nervous about their responsibility for their horse's feet. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing is how that horse feels immediately after taking the shoes off. And that's a can of worms, because some horses are absolutely fine straight away, and some horses need more protection. They need, transitioning isn't just about, we take the shoes off and we watch our horse being really uncomfortable for the next 6 weeks, but it's okay because in 6 weeks' time your horse will become sound. That's not how it works. It's about, how is this horse reacting? And again, that's to do with communication, because if the owner of the horse is communicating with their professional regularly, you can get on top of issues before they become a problem. So if the horse is uncomfortable, we need to support that horse, not just let it. Oh, I've heard so many things. Let's let it man up. He's a bit of a wimp. Let's just see how he goes. He'll be fine. Maybe put some surgical spirit on his feet because it'll harden up the sole. That type of thing. Those sort of things. That's kind of, yeah, exactly.
Gosh.
I love the face.
Yes, it's good. This is audio. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Go on, Miri. Sorry.
In that moment when I have managed many horses through the barefoot transition now, and obviously there are things that I know what to do, but this isn't about me talking about it. But in a lot of cases in those situations, it's a lot about expectations in that early stage, and I have a lot of difficult conversations with owners about having to really scale back what that horse is doing through that process while the blood supply is returning, while things are starting to shift and to change. And I think that's something that often people aren't very willing to do, potentially. And why, I guess my question is, why would it be a good idea for us to take a horse barefoot? Like someone like Rhi, who doesn't have a lame horse, he has good feet, she's having a lovely time. Why would it be of benefit for Rhi, with her horse that she wants to own for the rest of his life, and him have a long, happy, fulfilled career as a ridden horse? What could be the reasons? Maybe this is a good question for you, Lily, to answer. Like, what are the benefits to his body of being barefoot?
Yeah. So that is a huge question. Very good question. And the quick answer is it depends. But I will elaborate. So it's really important, just like Tom said, not to go cold turkey with going barefoot, because shoes will have been providing they increase the rigidity of the hoof capsule, and they obviously are adding material as well. They change the way that the loads that the horse is experiencing are going through that digit. And sometimes that helps and sometimes that hinders. So I think the maximum or the optimum maybe function of the horse's digit is when they are barefoot with good structure and function of that barefoot. But that's where it really depends, because if you have maybe a lot of very challenging surfaces where the horse lives, if there's maybe there's certain pathologies inside the foot, maybe if there are, we've just debated that, certain athletic requirements, but you may want to scale those back or change them. Or maybe just there are practical considerations to how you can manage a barefoot horse versus a shod horse. Then it may or may not be beneficial for that individual horse right now to be barefoot. So I would say that the ideal would be good comfort, structure, and function of a barefoot. So the things that provides, if you have a healthy alignment and morphology, so the shape of the hoof capsule, and also in relation to their limb, then you can have a healthy posture. And the way that the loads, when the horse is going through a stride cycle at any gait, the way that the loads are balanced on the soft tissues and the joints in both the foot and the rest of their body, ideally don't overload those structures and therefore lead to wear and tear injuries. But that's a lot of, it depends, because that's a lot of parameters to manage and get right. And depending on your horse's conformation, maybe their management as a foal, their nutritional history, what's going on with their gut microbiome, what stresses they might be under, the terrains that they walk across, how much they move, it really depends. So that's why I'm not, I think we were talking about using the word purist in terms of barefoot. But yeah, the the function of a foot when it's barefoot and not made more rigid by attaching something to it can be superior, because you can get better growth of structures and blood supply, that kind of thing. But it does really depend on all of those other factors. So I don't know if I've just opened up a hot.
I sort of have two questions. I've got one for Lily and then I've got a follow-up sort of for Tom. So Lily, let's just pie in the sky for a minute. Horse has perfect environment, is great without shoes, all the things are in place. What the benefits then are: less wear and tear. Is there other stuff that is good? Let's say everything's in place. What else is good for a barefoot horse? Or what would be good as a result of being barefoot?
Okay, yeah. So function of that hoof itself, the digit, would likely be superior to wearing metal or even plastic shoes. So wearing something rigid attached to their feet, it means that the capsule and the other structures in the foot. I'm being a little bit vague here because I could go into some anatomical terms, but it can all work because it can flex and move in a way that it can't so much if it's made more rigid.
Yeah, and I in my head, I guess that there's probably a cumulative effect over years and years of being barefoot, of reduced pressure and strain, etc. So that is exciting to me as someone who has a 7-year-old who is slightly is a heavier breed.
Yes, and the other thing is how it affects their lifestyle and their management. So, for example, whether you can turn them out with other horses, because to have a healthy lifestyle for their physical, mental, and emotional well-being, if they're shod all round, it's less safe to turn them out in a group, and so that will affect them in other ways.
That's a good moment for my follow-on for Tom, actually, which is, if I wanted to take shoes off, Tom, I've heard two schools of thought on whether or not you should take all 4 at once if you're shod all round, or whether you do 2 and 2. The people who tell me to take them all 4 at once are people who say, especially with a younger horse, the balance can be affected by just having front shoes left on. But there's other people who believe that taking all 4 off can be a bit difficult for the horse, and that taking the back ones off and then the front shoes is an easier transition. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'd start off by saying that everything that we do is a compromise. So the person who says that if you take a pair off first and leave a pair on, and the fact that there's a differential, obviously, between the thickness of the shoe and then the hoof without the shoe, that is exactly true. So if you take the fronts off, if you take the hinds off first, for example, then there is a differential, and that is going to unbalance the horse. Again, I think Lily and I kind of tend to sound like we're sitting on the fence. And the reason that we do that is because you've got to take each individual case as it is. The reason why our job is so interesting is because you could do something on one horse today and it worked perfectly. And you could do the same thing with another horse and it could go completely wrong. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is this compromise. And back to the question about the balance thing, my question would be, is your horse always standing completely level? Is it always standing on level ground? Because if it isn't, and there's a slight differential, if your horse is on a slight hill, then there is already an unbalance there. There's already an issue. There's already something there. The reason people talk about taking the hinds off first before taking the fronts off is because the fronts take about 2/3 of the weight, for argument's sake. So if a horse is going to struggle, it's going to struggle more on the front end. So, and if you take all 4 shoes off and the horse is sensitive, it has nowhere to load that mass if it's struggling a bit. But on the other side of that, that is still a compromise, because do you want your horse to have to load more towards the back end when you've taken the front shoes off? So I think my overarching answer to your question, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, there's a lot to unpick there. The answer that I would give is it doesn't matter whether it's just half a set or a set that you take off. the most important thing is supporting the horse when you're transitioning it. So if you take just the hinds off, maybe that horse needs some support to transition to that point first. If you take all four shoes off, then it might mean that the fronts need more support than the hinds did. What I'm really interested in, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, Lily, but obviously you didn't go into the anatomical side of things, and I'm guessing that's because our audience may be quite varied from what I've read, guys, about your podcasts. But I think it's really important that we talk a little bit more detail about what shoes do insofar as the restriction of the expansion and contraction of the hoof, because I'd be interested to know what you think. Personally, I believe that restriction in expansion and contraction causes a cascade of issues inside the hoof. And I don't know how much we can talk about without going into too much technical detail. That's the thing that scares me most about shoes.
I'm quite good at making things into layman's terms if you get a bit technical.
Great.
So go for it, Tom, and we'll see how we go.
I'd be interested. So I'm going to talk about what I think, and I'd really be interested to know what Lily thinks and whether she agrees with these things. The overarching issue that I have with shoes is the restriction of that expansion and contraction. So for anybody who doesn't know, when the hoof loads on the ground, it expands, okay, and the bony column comes down and the frog comes into contact with the ground. Can you imagine that in your mind? So so there's a whole process that happens as the horse loads its hoof and then unloads, and that has to do with circulation, so blood flow, and it has to do with absorption of the forces. There's a lot of forces going on. These horses have a large amount of mass on 4 relatively small pins, and so those forces that are absorbed during gait, I believe, are important. So if you put a steel shoe on a horse's hoof and you basically make that rigid, it can no longer expand and contract as it would do normally. I was reading a paper the other day for somebody else, and I've forgotten what exactly it is, but I think it's about 36% reduction in expansion and contraction of the hoof. So that, let's say it's 36%, just off the top of my head. Then that 36% reduction of expansion and contraction is going to follow on through on all of the functions of all of the tissues within the hoof. And I see that as a major issue. So, for example, if I was going to shoe a horse, I'd be looking at shoeing a horse with a material that improves that expansion and contraction. And if the shoe is on the hoof, then that frog cannot engage the ground properly because it's off the ground. And so again, if you're going to shoe a horse, maybe use the right material and then perhaps provide frog support. But this is purely my own opinion.
That's why you're here, Tom, to give your opinion. So don't worry, you're allowed. I had just a thought in that moment, and maybe this is a nice moment to ask the question of, like, what does a healthy horse's hoof look like? Like, can you describe some of the things that people could be looking for or noticing if their horses do wear shoes? I actually just filmed a video today talking all about this, demonstrating some healthy hooves and some non-healthy hooves on my yard, because it is such an interesting thing of, like, what are we really looking for?
And also it's not as simple as it sounds, because everybody knows that, like, you're not meant to have cracks in it, and you know, you don't want thrush down the middle. But actually, if you start digging for this on the internet, it gets so complicated. It's like looking at the Da Vinci Code sometimes, like the angles and the this and the that. And for the average person, you're just like, oh my God, I don't know if my horse is even alive at this point, let alone healthy hooves. It's so it can feel so complicated. So yeah, tell us.
Yeah, maybe if one of you want to just describe a healthy hoof or an unhealthy hoof, even just some of the kind of things in a general way, then I think that might be a really helpful thing for people to understand what we mean by, what we mean when we say that a hoof is starting to degrade because of the restriction of movement.
Yeah. Can I also just add, because I think everything that you just said, Tom, was really valuable, and to the question of taking 2 or 4 off, just briefly. I think so. This is not a contradiction at all. This is just an addition of what you said. I think that we are less good at recognizing hind limb discomfort. So we might think it's okay that they're coping all right having taken the back shoes off. And there is also, of course, the fact that they can perhaps more easily sometimes transfer a bit more weight to their fronts. But there is also kind of an epidemic of horses being, having difficulty loading their hind end in a healthy way, and that's a posture thing. It's very common in domesticated horses. Their lifestyle and some of the additions that we make to them mean that their limb posture is such that their hind limbs are less good at bearing their body weight. So I think us recognizing hind limb comfort is perhaps we're less, our eye is less able to see that. So I just had that thought when you were talking. So yes, a healthy hoof. So the frog is very important. That should be generous and kind of, I guess the word, I don't know if the word fleshy is right, but it just should be sort of robust, generous and plump, the frog, and take up. It shouldn't look like a little afterthought on the sole of the foot. It should be a really, there's actually some really helpful charts. The ELPO provides one. That's the Equine Lameness Prevention Organisation, and you can actually take some measurements. So, whether it takes up certain percentages of the underside of the foot. A front foot should generally be sort of circular, so it shouldn't be too much longer than it is wide, but that is also a bit breeding conformation specific. And the hind feet generally tend to be a bit more elongated. I'm sounding a bit vague again because breed and age and sometimes certain pathologies and things can change what a healthy foot looks like. There's a very good body of evidence to say that a straight hoof pastern axis is very important. So that's where, if you look from the side, the angle of the hoof, so you can see the front wall, the dorsal wall of the hoof, is the same as the pastern. So there's a good body of evidence that is needed to balance the loads on the soft tissues and is good for digit function. And then things like you said, the foot shouldn't be cracked or crumbling and things. And then there are certain things that might just indicate that a trim is needed, and it can be corrected in just a maintenance trim. So, for example, having a bit of a flare. So you might not have a really tight hoof capsule around the internal structures. There might be, what's the word? Well, it flares outwards a bit. So you get a bit of a dish. But in some cases, if you have a bit of a dish to the wall, it's a pathology, or it will need a bit more than just one maintenance trim. So again, when you look at a foot and you're going to correct it or rehab it or make it healthier, sometimes those things are very easy and quick to correct, and sometimes they will take a bit of time.
And I've read a bit about the heels as well, and how contracted heels, which are caused by the shoe, obviously at the back of the shoe, kind of pushes the heels in, and actually on a barefoot horse or on a healthy hoof, they should be wider and more sort of plump. Is that, I don't know if this is the right language, but this is my research has told me. Does that feel accurate?
Yes, absolutely. So also the back of the foot is supposed to be a kind of padded shock absorbing structure. So there's a tissue called the digital cushion at the back. And yes, you can get the heels contracting and sort of curling inwards so that the foot looks almost more cone shaped as it goes down towards the ground. And those structures at the back, so there's some structures called the lateral cartilages, which get very thin and don't have as good of a blood supply when the rigid shoe stops that expansion and contraction that Tom was just talking about. And then you have the cascade that he was talking about of other knock-on effects. And what happens there is if you don't have all of the sort of plump padded structures at the back, it depends on the horse. Sometimes you can have the angles of the foot change where the heels become low and sort of underrun. Sometimes the foot remains upright, but it's more contracted and cone shaped. So yeah, you can get different knock-on effects depending on the conformation and maybe their breeding or their posture, and what's also been done in terms of shoeing or trims to address that. Can't remember, I was going to go somewhere else. Infection is a really, really important thing, because sometimes there is quite deep infection that maybe it doesn't look like what you would think of as thrush, like black smelly when you're picking the feet out, but there is actually a crease that goes all the way up through the middle of the frog and between the heels, which is really quite painful. Or there's just not enough of that padding at the back of their foot, and so they don't really land on the back. And that can get you into this vicious cycle of they're putting a lot of concussion through the bony column. They might even be landing fully toe first, which is not very helpful. But they're trying to not to put too much weight on that back of the foot, which is weak or painful. And it will especially be painful if you have that infection that goes all the way through and is actually separating their heels. That's quite a common reason actually for taking the horse barefoot, not resulting in in my experience, not resulting in an improvement in function, is if we actually aren't addressing that infection, because it can be quite tenacious sometimes.
While we are on the topic of the barefoot hoof, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of nutrition. And nutrition is something that is incredibly important when it comes to barefoot hooves. And I have suffered with horses struggling with abscesses and not healthy hooves. And both Lily and Tom have touched on this in this episode. I am here to talk to you about one of the sponsors of our podcast today, Equifeast. Now, Equifeast I have fed now for a number of years. I was originally came to feeding Equifeast because of Blondie, because she has PSSM, which is a metabolic syndrome. And so I needed to find a balancer that would work for her. And so I have come to understand a bit more about the way that their mineral balancers work. And I have never had horses with such good feet as I have since I have been using Equifeast. They are magnesium free, which is something that I feel is a positive benefit. Some horses are very sensitive to magnesium, and the way that Equifeast encourages you to feed is very in line with how I feed my horses. I only feed singular ingredient feeds, and so it all aligns very well with Equifeast, as they believe that there isn't a huge amount of research that goes into what we feed our horses. So feeding them as simply as we possibly can and as species appropriately as we can is very important to them. Equifeast is very cool, and they offer a free diet review, so you can find all of the details about Equifeast and how they can help your horses in the show notes below. This brings us on to a very good question, because often, I say it's a very good question, that's a bit bold of me, isn't it? It might be rubbish. But a good topic is what I meant. It's been a long day, guys. We wanted to talk a bit about, hoof dressing. And I think this is something that comes up in conversation, right? Is people are like, oh, I paint the hooves every day, but they're not better, whatever it might be. And can we talk about infection first? And then can we talk about the kind of more everyday stuff that people are often very commonly doing? We actually have a horse in our yard at this point that has chronic infection in his feet. His feet are very bad shape, And I think a good one that I talk to people about is like types of triangles. So you have like an equilateral triangle that's like as wide as it is, like all of the angles are the same. And that's like a nice healthy looking frog, like it's nice and triangular. And then you get an isosceles triangle that is pointier than it is wide. Don't worry, I did actually look these up just as we were talking to make sure I didn't say the wrong kind of triangle. But for you, like an isosceles would look more like that, whereas an equilateral triangle would look more like that.
It's like a taller triangle.
Yeah, taller, thinner.
Taller than it is.
Yeah. Yes. And they're unlikely to ever be actually equilateral, but more in that direction than this like pointy thin thing that slivers down the middle and looks really uncomfortable. Tom's going to shout at me in a second for saying the wrong thing, but this horse has got long slivery feet, and he has always had long slivery feet, and I think he potentially always will have, because that's confirmationally, we've looked at x-rays and his pedal bones are really quite long and slivery. But he has this chronic infection in the frogs where the frogs are still not totally healthy. What could we be doing if we have horses with chronically sheared heels? What can we be doing to help that start to go the right way and the tissue to redevelop internally?
Loads to
Come on,
unpack
vet.
again. Massive question.
Oh.
I love it.
Okay.
I love it. It's good. Okay, so first thing to say from my point of view is that you have different types of infections in different parts of the hoof. And we were talking a moment ago about hoof structure. So like thinking about the hoof wall. So I'm just going to go away from the frog for just one moment. I read a lot about dry feet. Dry feet need moisturising. And I would love, if I had the money and the time, I would love to do a study on how many of those, and I'm going to use air brackets, which is a terrible thing to do, but dry feet, are they really dry, or is there an infection within the wall? Because those feet that crack up, I personally believe it's an infection within the hoof wall more often than not. And I think if you think about things a little bit more logically, so just outside of where we are, we're in wet. I'm in the southwest of England, and it's forever raining. So we don't see dry conditions very often. And I do think that kind of that wet dry situation, that is a thing in my mind. But if you look around the world, there are horses that cope extremely well in very, very dry conditions. I mean, if you think about, your Arab, where, Arab feet belong to Arab horses, belong to, dry climates. And there's not this major drive for moisturizing feet. And I think that there's a misconception. There's a massive marketing thing. Like, we love our horses, of course we do, and that's a really good thing. I'm not sort of knocking that. That's the reason I love my job, is because I love working with horses. But so it's a really easy sell, isn't it? So really easy sell that if you've got feet that crack up a little bit or break up a little bit, we definitely need to spend loads of money on this really expensive moisturizer. So that's a thing there. The other thing is hooves that would naturally self-trim, like, they won't look neatly, they won't have nice fine defined edges as if I've just put a rasper on the foot, or you have. Okay, so when a horse naturally trims, bits of horn break away, and that horn has limited structural integrity. It's old horn, and it's due to be worn away. Okay, and so sometimes we can look at hooves that we think are unhealthy, and in actual fact, I think they're just doing their thing. They're doing what they should be doing. Other feet that are actually, we think are dry, are not dry. They've got an infection in, and we need to be applying something different and be maybe thinking about diet and nutrition. Oh my God, I've just gone on a massive ramble, and I can't
I
actually
loved
think
it.
what. Oh, you were also talking about frogs, and I think another thing that we sometimes miss. I totally agree with you, Lily, about the angle of the hoof, and I think we've come away. So things seem to become cyclical, and it's not fashionable to talk about hoof pastern access. But that pastern, looking at the angle of the pastern and looking at the angle of the toe, we don't need to be rocket scientists about this. And things can sound really complicated to the horse owner. You can physically just stand your horse, stand back from it, where the horse is, you're looking at the side of the horse, and you can look at that hoof angle and you can think to yourself, does one angle, the joint of the pastern, does that follow the hoof? And if it doesn't, why doesn't it? We need to look at that. However, we could have a situation where that angle is correct, but actually their heel is really long. And if that frog isn't being engaged sufficiently, the frog starts to deteriorate and is more likely to get, in my mind, more likely to get infection because the heels are too long and things aren't working the way they should. So we also need to be thinking about, are the heels the right length? And that's slightly harder for the owner to judge. Sometimes if the frog is too full and hasn't exfoliated yet, then you don't realize how long those heels are. And actually, until you trim a bit of that frog back, it's then that you see how much heel you've got. Which leads me to one other thing, and then I will be quiet for a moment. Sometimes the frogs exfoliate after a long period of dry weather. We're going to have wet weather in the southwest, and I will bet you £100 that somebody will contact me and say, my horse is completely sound, but there's a massive hole where the frog used to be. I need you to come and look at it. And it's really scary. I'm not mocking it. And what happens is that frog can exfoliate in one large lump. That's the old frog. It's come away. The young frog is very soft, very young, and quite minuscule in comparison to the old frog. And that can be a bit of a worry. So just preempting, when we come into autumn and the ground gets softer, you might lose your frog. And if you do, it's fine. That's perfectly normal. Don't panic.
It's okay to lose your
infection, though. Can we talk about infection in the frog? What should I do with this chronic horse's infected frog?
This is, again, so there's loads of things on the market and varying in expense. And I think, again, a large part of this is a marketing thing. The frog being trimmed, if there's so I like to leave a frog if I can, but sometimes the frog becomes quite leathery, and sometimes it can harbour debris, and then that's a really nice environment for pathogens to survive and breed in there. So one thing would be, I would like to just neaten that up with my knife and just trim around the frog so that is easier for you guys to pick out. I think communication is really important again. So it's important that the owner knows how to manage the horse with picking the feet out. Management of the bed. So if the horse is in a certain condition, if the bed's, we're all really busy people. So it might be that the bed could do with skipping out a bit more often. I think not allowing that frog to have too much debris sitting in there for too much of a time is really important. And then obviously topical solutions. And diet as well. If the horse is on a really sugary diet, I don't know if this is true, and I don't know what studies there are, but I do wonder whether if the horse is on quite a high sugar diet, whether it's more likely to get thrush in different places, and the frog might be one of those places.
Well, without being too, that Candida overgrowth is a really common thing if you have a high sugar diet. Like people get thrush in their mouth, for example, if you eat too much sugar. We won't go into the delving into Candida overgrowth too much, but I agree. That surely is right. I don't think Rhi's quite cottoned on to what I'm talking about here, but it is, that sounds very relevant. So if I was to counter you, Tom, and ask you another question of, I am doing all of those things with this horse, do we think that this is probably down then to the pathology of the hoof? And actually when we can remedy and continue to improve the pathology of the hoof, that is when we will start to solve the chronic infection, because it is to do with the shape of the foot rather than the conditions that the foot is living in, because all of the things that you described are perfect as such.
Mm-hmm. So when you've looked at those x-rays, are the heels long?
No.
Those heels need to come down. They're not long. Okay.
Maybe you and I should have a private conversation about this, Tom.
Yeah. Go on, Lily. I was going to go into a story, and I don't think it's a good time to go into a story.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that it can be a bit of a catch-22 situation, what I'm about to say. But I think that there is a relationship between the amount of movement that they're getting and what type of movement and infection in the frog and deep central sulcus, which goes up. That's what I was talking about, where you have sometimes it's this really, really thin split and it goes all the way up between the heels.
That's what he's got.
Yeah. So it's a vicious cycle because then they don't load the back of their foot as much as they should because it's a bit sore. But I think there is a relationship between their susceptibility to infection and it clearing up and them landing more heel first and loading more the back of their foot. So that can be difficult to get around because while you have the infection, they don't want to put more weight on the back half of their foot. But what I find tends to be needed is some quite generous padding, maybe in boots, for example, alongside all of the antimicrobial stuff, so that they are more comfortable loading the back half of their foot. I don't know about studies on this and things, but I'm sure that it changes the blood flow. It changes the amount that split maybe opens up and the heels can start to relax down and decontract. The whole function of the back. So the back half of the foot is supposed to be their sort of padded, shock absorbing bit, not the toe. That's not. That's more of like the function of the front half is more for well, when you see, if you see something like a slow-mo of a horse galloping, you can see how much the toe provides pushing off. And I mean, there's so many things that we could go into about the functions of different parts of the foot, but you shouldn't have, it would be worth slow-mo videoing him moving. Is he landing? Is he avoiding loading the back half of his foot? And if so, it probably
I'll report back.
Improving, which is also, you know, addressing the infection is part of that.
Yeah, it's a circle, right? Yeah. One will improve one thing, and then the next thing will improve the next thing. Go for it, Rhi.
I kind of have one more question, and it's slightly selfish, but I also feel like there'll be lots of people in this position. So, following through our conversation today, I've made an assessment. I'm theoretically speaking, but also sort of not. Made an assessment that my horse has the right environment to go barefoot. I've done the nutritional prep to make sure that they are nutritionally balanced and their hooves are in a good position. I've made my choice about whether I'm going to take fronts off or all backs off together. I've taken my horse barefoot and I've got hoof boots if I need them. The next thing I often see, I've got good communication with my farrier / podiatrist / person who does my feet. The thing I see often then is people saying, well, you need to do a rehab program. You need to walk them on the road to improve the blood flow. You need to do this and you need to do that. What is your perspective on, let's say, the average owners like myself? I've lowered my expectations. I'm going to reduce the workload or what I'm expecting of my horse, but I'm going to do a bit of hacking and a bit of work in the school. How much more beyond that do we need? Oh, and he's going to get turnout and he walks down the road to get to his field. Beyond that, do we need to be doing things like walking in hand on the road to encourage blood flow and things like that? What are your points of view on that? Is the answer it depends?
Yes. And I think the thing is that it's like, it's very understandable to want some certainty about timescales and what to expect, but it is quite difficult to give that certainty, because you don't know in each individual horse what is going to progress from that moment. And so I've actually recently had quite a lot of feedback from the clients that I work with that the approach that I take is quite different to what a lot of people expect, where you receive something like a protocol to follow. Whereas how I tend to work is I tell you how to observe your horse. So they tell you the timings and what to do next. Not, you do 2 weeks, you do 15 minutes, you don't, it doesn't seem to work like that. Well, if you do it like that, then I think you miss all of these signs because you're following the protocol. So you're maybe not observing, and it gets down the road and you think, oh, wait, we're not where we thought we would be. So I think it's almost more helpful. It's totally understandable to want the certainty of what's going to happen next and what's needed. In terms of how much movement, I mean, I don't think many domesticated horses have enough movement, because if they were free roaming, depending on the size of their home range and availability of food and water and other things that would happen with coming across other bands of horses and predators and that kind of thing, they might move 5 miles a day or they might move 40 miles a day, not with weight on their back, not with a restricted head position. There's a lot. There's a lot, and on varying terrains and inclines and everything. So turnout free movement is definitely important, I would say, not just your controlled exercise. And then really observing how comfortable they are without a rider's weight on their back. Really honestly looking, because sometimes you don't really want to know, or they're not quite ready for riding yet. Really being honest with yourself about that when you go barefoot, because some horses might be fine quite quickly and other horses will need quite a lot longer.
And so there would be a period of time where you would suggest that you don't ride, if we're just trying to get it to be a little bit.
They're ready, and some of them might be ready straight away, but I would definitely give them that time to make those observations.
Nice.
And that's the problem, isn't it? I think that's one of the major issues that I come across with barefoot is my question is always, why do you want your horse to go barefoot? What is it that you want to gain from this? Because if it's financial, it's not going to save you a lot of money, because you need to be invested enough to be able to move with the changes that your horse is going to go through. And that's, I mean, like as Lily said, that could be really simple. It could be a case to take the shoes off and go straight for it. It may do, but the chances are it isn't. So if it's a financial reason, probably don't. If you've done your research as much as you possibly can, and you've kind of bought into this idea as a kind of a life choice for your horse, and you know the reasons you want to do it, then by all means go ahead. And at that point, you're not asking the questions of, so when can I ride him? And I know that sounds a bit harsh, but actually, if your first question is going to be, when can I ride him? Again, my advice would probably be don't, because you're not quite there yet. And transitioning isn't about taking the shoes off. It's also your transit. I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, but actually transitioning yourself. I've
Definitely,
transitioned as a
100%.
farrier.
It's a real
I'm not
commitment.
anti-shoes. Pardon?
It's just such a commitment. It is a commitment because you're gaining something with the function of the hoof.
Well,
but
it's a
you are
transition
also
of perspective, isn't it? That's what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's that management. It's about expectation management. I find that's kind of 70% of my job is the owner, is dealing with the people, and in a good way, it's to do with managing expectations and discussing where we're going to be, and if this happens, how are you going to feel about that, and what you're going to do. Like, just for example, just something that comes up all the time is you're on a livery yard, so you can't have a track system. Okay, well, that's one aspect. It would be handy if you did, but it's not a no-no. 98% of my clients don't have track systems, and their horses are barefoot and sound and happy, which is where we want them to be. That's the gold standard, in my opinion. But if there's a track from the stable to the field, it might be that you need to put some protection on the horse initially, going from the stable to the track and going to the stable to the field. And they say to me, but it's only there. And I say, yeah, okay, take your shoes and socks off and let me watch you
off you
walk
go.
from the stable to the field, because you're not going to like it. And if you're doing that twice a day, 7 days a week, what I think might happen is you kind of get this situation where you get sole bruise on sole bruise over a period of time, and you've basically lost that opportunity of going barefoot before you've really begun. And so if you've got in your mind that you're transitioning yourself and you want to transition your horse and you're willing and want to put boots on to go from the stable to the field, then we can have a conversation about going barefoot. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
the commitment.
totally.
Yeah.
It is. And, I have a whole yard of barefoot horses, and it is a massive commitment, and you have to be mindful that sometimes you're going to have to support them. And, you break a sweat when you put 4 hoof boots on an Irish draft. You do. And it is bloody hard work. And sometimes there's scoot boots when it's wet and you lose one in the mud and you have to get off. But for me, as a barefoot enthusiast, the benefits outweigh the cost as such, because I can see my horses' bodies functioning in such a different way. As someone who always had shoes in their horses, that was just what we did. And now having this small case study of experience that I've got, you start to see the changes in these horses over time is so... I've had horses, I spoke about it before on our conversation, I think it was Lily, where we had this horse and she would hit the ground with her feet. The way she would move was so unaware. The shoes came off. Her feet were actually very good horn quality. She didn't go through any soreness. And the way that she moved, it was like she was like, oh my goodness, I am replugging myself into the earth. And I think that kind of thing, I'm like, yeah, that's the cool bit. That's the benefit. Yeah, it's bloody hard work sometimes, and I swear about the hoof boots. But those moments, I'm like, okay, stick with it. We're doing the right thing here.
I just wanted to say something about the transition and transitioning yourself, because there is that. It's extremely rewarding to notice those things. And also sometimes I think it opens a whole can of worms of when you see things that you can no longer unsee all over the place. And you might notice things that you need to address in other areas. And you might realize things about comfort and things and the function of the rest of your horse's body that you didn't realize about before when you're becoming more observant, you're checking in more, and it's almost sometimes can be there can be some grief in that process, as well as it being very rewarding and opening up a lot more possibilities. So yes, to be ready for that transition and to know that there's going to be stuff that you see and you can't unsee it anymore in every horse that you look at.
And I think that this is a huge part of really becoming a horse person, because when you really truly see the horse for who they are and what they are offering on that day, then you start to be really truly for the horse, because it's when we don't want to see those things that it's because of a human need or a human want. And if we've said things along today and you feel like you're not there, that's okay. You're where you are at, and that's all right. But if there are things and you're like, you know what, I feel like that is the case and I feel really open to that and accepting of that, then you may find out things that you don't want to know, but they are always things that you need to know. And that's going to go on a t-shirt one day. I'm sure of it, because I say it all the time.
You do. It's good. I do. It's a good little phrase.
And it sucks sometimes. And you find out things like you say, Lily, that you can't unsee, and you realise that actually there's more problem than you thought there was. But if you can start to see the root of the problem, then you can start to solve it. And that's when we start to have healthier, happier, whole athletes.
That's really interesting you say that, because I actually get that as a farrier, as a trimmer. So you think you know. So one of the reasons I love my job is my horses, and the other reason I love my job is because it's never ever the same. And so you can sometimes get into a slightly confident situation where you think you know what's going on, and then you see that it's not going the way you want it to. And a horse will always tell you. A horse will always do that. And I love to hear, oh, he's lazy, he's this, he's that, or she's, talking about the horse, I mean. And in actual fact, they're so genuine. They are so genuine that they will do what you want them to do, even in discomfort. And they'll do it for a really a crazy amount of time. And so sometimes when, like you said, when you really start to see things, you look and you go, oh my God, this isn't right. And sometimes I'll be at work and I will have spent long enough with this horse already in Tom's world. Yeah, Tom's got another client to go and see. He really needs to get on, and he's sort of done the job. And then you walk the horse up, or you trot it up, and you go, you're not done yet, Tom. You've got more work to do right now. And it doesn't fit my lifestyle. It doesn't fit, it doesn't fit my timetable right now. But it is amazing. And like you said, it might be annoying in the moment, but you can't unsee it, can you?
Absolutely.
You can't do that. You've got to stick with the truth.
We have a closing tradition on the podcast, and I have asked Lily this question when she came on first. So, Tom, you're up. If you... Here we go. I've sent it to you, so don't worry. You were pre-warned of this question, Tom. No panicking. If you had one thing that you could tell every equestrian in the whole world and they had to listen, what would you say?
Overall, nothing to do with barefoot. What I would have to say is an animal's or a horse's only form of communication is behaviour. That would be it. Just ask yourself the question. So, like I said, whatever it's doing, is it bucking you off? Is it kicking out? Is it launching over the stable door at you? That's not that it's a nasty horse. There's no such thing. That would be it.
Oh my God, that's really... Because a lot of people come on here and it's a great sentence, listen to your horse, but actually you've said that through a different lens but it actually lands in a different way when you say your horse's only way of communicating with you is their behaviour. And I do sometimes think about that. And I think someone said it to me once, and they were like, just imagine that for a day you couldn't speak to anybody at all, and you could only use your body to communicate things, and then you're put in a few uncomfortable positions or in physical pain, and you then have to communicate that. And then imagine if you really want to add the difficult layer of like being reprimanded for that behaviour, for that attempt at communication. And actually when you start looking at things through that lens, it becomes very uncomfortable to face some of the training techniques or ways that we handle our horses.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Gosh, what a conversation. I feel so honoured to have had you both here today and to talk to this big, lovely group of very interested horse people that we have been fortunate enough to gather together to listen to this podcast. We will put all of Tom and Lily's information in the show notes. So if you were interested in reaching out to them or just seeing a bit more about what they do, hearing about how they work and maybe working with them, I can't wait for you to come and visit Tom. I'm really excited about that. Just a reminder that you did promise you would come and visit me.
I did.
On record.
On record. That will all be in the show notes. But thank you so much, guys, for listening today. And thank you again, Tom and Lily, for joining us. What a privilege it has been.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for such a great opportunity. Good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.